Just imagine, you're a colonist living in, I don't know, a bustling colonial town, paying lower taxes than folks back in England. You've got this wide open land, beckoning you westward.
Sounds pretty idyllic. Yeah.
You'd think life would be pretty sweet, right?
Yeah.
But for many American colonists in the 1700s, well, a storm was brewing. They felt this growing unease, a sense that their freedoms were being chipped away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're diving deep into today, right? The undercurrents of tension that led to, well, a revolution.
Exactly. A revolution that, birthed the very nation we live in today.
It's fascinating to think about, like, how this pre-revolution period, I mean, it's central to American identity, obviously.
Of course.
But it's often just a footnote in British history.
Right.
Like, we're looking at the same tapestry, but focusing on these completely different threads.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, like looking through, opposite ends of the telescope almost.
Right, right. But luckily we've got an expert in 18th century Anglo-American relations to guide us.
Glad I had to be here.
So to really grasp these tensions, we need to kind of set the stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So imagine the American colonies in the
Yeah.
mid-1700s. I mean, this vibrant mix of people, this land of opportunity.
A place where, self-governance wasn't just an idea.
Wow.
It was a way of life.
A world away from, well, I mean, the halls of power in London.
Yes.
Both geographically and, it seems, ideologically.
Absolutely. And that vast distance, I mean, it meant news traveled slowly.
Right.
And for the most part, the colonies, they managed their own affairs. They still considered themselves loyal British subjects.
Right.
But then came the 7 Years' War.
Known to us as the French and Indian War.
Exactly. And everything changed.
So this war, I mean, it was fought on American soil. Right?
Yeah.
Britain and its colonies against France and its Native American allies.
Mm-hmm.
A hard-won British victory, but one that came at a steep price.
It did. The war, it absolutely drained Britain's coffers.
Yeah.
The national debt, it soared. And it forced the government to look for, well, new sources of revenue.
And where do they turn their gaze?
Well, to the American colonies, of course.
Oh.
Policies aimed at, raising money, assaulting control, they were swiftly put into place.
So we're talking about, like, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act.
Mm-hmm.
These were, from Britain's point of view, ways to, like, make the colonies contribute to the empire's defense, right?
Precisely. To the British government, these measures, they seem perfectly reasonable.
Wow.
I mean, after all, the colonists, they were enjoying the protection of the British military. So shouldn't they help foot the bill?
Makes sense, yeah.
Right.
But the colonists, they saw it very differently.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine you've been running your own affairs for years,
Mm-hmm.
accustomed to a certain degree of, freedom,
Right.
and suddenly you're being told what to do.
Yep.
And even worse, what to pay.
That sense of betrayal, it was palpable. The colonists, they argued that they had no voice in Parliament. So why should they be subjected to its taxes? The cry of no taxation without representation. I mean, that wasn't just a slogan. It was a roar of frustration echoing across the colonies.
So this clash, it wasn't just about money, was it?
No.
It was about two very different ideas of, like, power and who holds it.
Absolutely. On one hand, you had the British government clinging to this concept of parliamentary sovereignty, the ultimate authority of Parliament. And on the other, you had the colonists fiercely protective of their local assemblies and their hard-won tradition of self-governance. It was a recipe for conflict.
Yeah. And that conflict, it was only intensified by this vast ocean separating them.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't like sending an email back then. Messages, they could take months to cross the Atlantic.
Absolutely. Misunderstandings, misinterpretations, they were almost inevitable.
Like trying to, I don't know, resolve a family argument through letters that take weeks to arrive.
Exactly. Huge potential for things to escalate.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what happened.
Both sides felt justified. Both sides felt aggrieved. And that breakdown in communication, well, it's like watching a slow-motion train wreck.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't just about taxes and governance, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Religion and identity, they also played a significant role.
They did. You see, the colonies, they weren't a monolith. They were a melting pot of religious groups, each with its own views on authority and how society should be governed.
Right.
The Puritans in New England, the Anglicans in Virginia. I mean, they all contributed to this complex and, at times, conflicting political landscape.
And then there's the Great Awakening.
Ah, yes.
This religious revival that swept through the colonies in the mid-18th century.
And it wasn't just about, sermons and fire and brimstone. It sparked something deeper. It encouraged people to question established authority, to listen to their own conscience. And that shift in thinking and that questioning of traditional power structures, it had profound implications for the relationship between the colonies and the crown.
It's like this religious fervor played a role in shaping a distinctly American identity,
Mm-hmm.
one that was, well, increasingly at odds with British control.
Absolutely. And those simmering tensions, they eventually boiled over in a series of events that put the two sides on a collision course.
Events that revealed just how wide the chasm between them had become.
Exactly. And that confrontation, well, it wasn't long in coming. It arrived cloaked in darkness and disguised as Mohawk warriors at Boston Harbor in 1773.
The Boston Tea Party. I mean, everyone's heard the story, right?
Yeah.
But it's worth revisiting because it wasn't just about, tea.
No, it was a carefully orchestrated act of defiance, this public rejection of British control. And it sent shockwaves across the Atlantic.
Imagine the scene. I mean, chests of tea, these symbols of British authority, plummeting into the icy waters of Boston Harbor.
Bold move.
It was a bold move, even audacious.
Yeah.
And it showed the world just how far the colonists were willing to go to defend their principles.
Absolutely. And the British response, well, it was swift
Mm-hmm.
and harsh.
Yeah, the coercive acts,
Mm-hmm.
dubbed the intolerable acts by the colonists. I mean, they were designed to punish Massachusetts, bring them to heel,
Okay.
closing the port of Boston, restricting town meetings, giving more power to the royally appointed governor. These were actions designed to isolate and control.
Right.
But instead of crushing the rebellion, they had the opposite effect.
The other colonies, they saw what was happening to Massachusetts and thought, well, that could be us next.
Exactly.
The coercive acts meant to divide, well, they actually unified the colonies in their opposition to British rule. It was a turning point. The idea of reconciliation, finding some common ground, it seemed to evaporate. The air, it was thick with tension, this unspoken threat of violence.
And that violence, well, it erupted in April 1775 in the towns of Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world, a clash between colonial militiamen and British troops. And it marked the beginning of the American Revolution.
These battles, though small in scale compared to what was to come, they shattered that fragile peace. They transformed a war of, words and ideas into a war of blood and bullets.
It's hard to imagine, I think, what it must have been like for those living through those times, the uncertainty, the fear, the knowledge that their world was being torn apart.
Absolutely.
And it's important to remember that, not everyone chose sides so neatly.
You're right. There were many who remained loyal to the crown, often for deeply personal or economic reasons. These loyalists, well, they found themselves caught between two worlds, often facing, suspicion and hostility from both sides.
The American Revolution, it wasn't just a fight for independence. I mean, it was a civil war,
Right.
pitting neighbor against neighbor,
Friend against friend.
friend against friend.
And to add to the complexity, the colonists, well, they faced an almost impossible task.
Going up against the mightiest military force in the world,
Mm-hmm.
with limited resources, no standing army.
It's a classic David and Goliath story.
But David, in this case, well, he had a few aces up his sleeve.
He did. They knew the terrain, they were fighting for their homes and families, and crucially, they had the support of, foreign powers.
Right.
Foreign powers who saw a chance to weaken their British rivals.
The French,
Yes.
eager to avenge their defeat in the 7 Years' War. They provided financial aid, military supplies, and eventually, well, troops. Their involvement, I mean, it would prove crucial in tipping the scales in favor of the colonists.
Absolutely.
So the American Revolution, it wasn't just this, local squabble.
Yep.
It was part of this larger global power struggle. It's a reminder that even events that seem, far removed from us
Mm-hmm.
can have these ripple effects that shape the course of history.
But amidst the grand strategies and political maneuvering, it's important not to lose sight of the human cost of this conflict. Thousands died, families were torn apart, lives were, forever altered.
And the impact went far beyond the battlefield.
Absolutely.
Women, slaves, Native Americans, groups often marginalized in, traditional historical narratives.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were deeply affected by the war.
They were. For women, the war brought, new responsibilities and challenges. They managed farms and businesses, cared for the wounded, and in some cases even, took up arms. their contributions, I mean, they were essential to the war effort.
And for slaves, I mean, the war offered a glimmer of hope, a chance for freedom. Many risked everything to escape to, British lines, where they were promised emancipation. Others joined the patriot cause, hoping that their service would earn them their freedom.
And for Native Americans, the war was a tragedy. Caught between these warring factions, they were often forced to choose sides or face retribution. The conflict resulted in, well, further displacement and dispossession for many tribes.
The American Revolution, for all its talk of liberty and equality, well, it had a dark side.
It did.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of freedom, however noble, often comes at a price. And that price is often paid by, well, those who are already most vulnerable.
It's a complex and often uncomfortable truth, but it's a truth we need to confront if we want to, truly understand the legacy of this pivotal period in history.
It's incredible to think about, all these events happening centuries ago and how they still shape our world today. Like the echoes of the American Revolution, you can feel them, these movements for democracy and human rights across the globe.
The Declaration of Independence, it wasn't just a document, it was a beacon. This bold statement of principles that resonated, far beyond the 13 colonies. Mm-hmm. It's no coincidence that those words, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, well, they continue to inspire people, fighting for freedom and justice today.
But the Declaration, it wasn't just about, ideals.
Yeah.
It was the declaration of war. And that war, a war that began with a few shots fired in Massachusetts, well, it raged on for years.
It did. And the colonists, they faced an uphill battle. They were outmatched, outgunned, and yet, well, they persevered.
They used their knowledge of the terrain, their determination, and this unwavering belief in their cause to keep the fight alive.
And they had help, of course.
Right. We talk about the French involvement, but it's worth, emphasizing just how crucial that alliance was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It provided the colonists with the resources and the manpower, the things they needed to turn the tide of the war.
And that turning point, well, it came with the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. This decisive victory for the colonists, it convinced the French that, supporting the American cause, it wasn't just a gamble.
Right.
It was a strategic move.
So from that point on, the momentum shifted.
Yeah.
The war dragged on for several more years, but ultimately the colonists, with the help of their French allies, well, they prevailed.
They did. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, formally recognizing American independence. Think about that for a moment. A group of colonies, fueled by an idea, had defeated, well, a global superpower. It was a monumental achievement, a testament to the power of, collective will, a shared vision.
But winning independence, that was just the beginning. The real challenge, it lay in building a nation from scratch.
Right.
A nation that could live up to the ideals enshrined in, in the Declaration.
And the American experiment, it was fraught with challenges. How do you create a government that balances individual liberty with the need for order? How do you address the deeply ingrained institution of slavery? This contradiction at the very heart of a nation founded on the principle of equality. These were questions that would haunt the new nation for generations to come.
The legacy of the American Revolution, it's complex, it's multifaceted.
It is.
It's a story of triumph and tragedy,
yeah,
of progress and setbacks, of ideals both realized and betrayed.
And it's a story that continues to unfold, a story that challenges us to confront the complexities of our past and to, grapple with the unfinished business of building a more just and equitable society.
So what does this all mean for us, you might ask? Well, it means that history, it isn't just this, collection of dusty old stories. It's a living, breathing thing. It shapes who we are and how we see the world. And the American Revolution, with all its complexities and contradictions, well, it reminds us that the pursuit of freedom, it's an ongoing struggle, a struggle that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and our active participation.
Well said.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the events leading up to the American Revolution, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration, where we'll delve into the challenges of forging a new nation and the enduring legacy of this pivotal period in history.